So we are in the last section of Sankhya and Yoga. If you remember, yesterday we were discussing about the major problems with the Sankhya philosophy. In fact, they are both, in a way, the two problems, but they could be seen as one problem itself. There is a question of the plurality of the Purushas. And in this paragraph, giving the reasons that Sankhya would give, Sri Aurobindo also concludes saying that here too we see that the multiplicity of souls is an inevitable conclusion from the data of the Sankhya analysis of existence. So we were wanting to know if this is the true solution. But before we take that up again, let us see what Gita has to say. How does Lord Krishna answer this question of the multiple Purushas? Because this question of the multiple Purushas seems to be logical, pragmatic even, but it is not as per the Vedas and Sri Krishna, and also as we see in Sri Aurobindo. That is not the spiritual experience. Spiritual experience points to a single supreme reality and not to the duality of Purusha and Prakriti, and worse still, to many Purushas. Let's take up this para where we see the Gita's answer to this question. The Gita starts from this analysis and seems at first, even in its setting forth of yoga, to accept it almost wholly. It accepts Prakriti and her 3 gunas and 24 principles. Well, yesterday we have seen the 24 principles. I did make a chart once again, but today it has to be put on computer before I could pass it on to you. Maybe in our next session we'll do that. So those are the 24 tattvas or 24 principles. And Gita accepts all this. Gita accepts the attribution of all action to the Prakriti and the passivity of the Purusha. Accepts the multiplicity of conscious beings in the cosmos. Accepts the dissolution of the identifying ego sense, the discriminating action of the intelligent will, and the transcendence of the action of the 3 modes of energy as a means of liberation. The yoga which Arjuna is asked to practice from the outset is yoga by the buddhi, the intelligent will. But there's one deviation of capital importance. The Purusha is regarded as one, not many. So you see, that's where is the main objection to Sankhya. Even Sri Aurobindo accepts, exactly as the Gita, the question of Prakriti, the question of the gunas and the passivity of the Purusha, and that there has to be Trigunatita, that means going beyond the 3 gunas. All this is acceptable. But both the Gita and Sri Aurobindo would reject this concept of the many Purushas. For the free, immaterial, immobile, eternal, immutable self of the Gita, but for one detail, is a Vedantic description of the eternal, passive, immobile, immutable Purusha of the Sankhya. But the capital difference is that there is one and not many. This brings in the whole difficulty which the Sankhya multiplicity avoids, and necessitates a quite different solution. This the Gita provides by bringing into its Vedantic Sankhya the ideas and principles of Vedantic Yoga. Well, we have also noted this yesterday, that to say that there is only one Purusha is on the pragmatic level a bit of a confusing thing. Because if there is only one Purusha, and we said if out of this innumerable persons, if somebody gets liberation, it means what? Two things. Either he has not got liberation, or if he or she has got liberation, that means the whole of mankind will get liberation, because there is only one Purusha. So we get into this kind of a complexity. So that is why Sankhya had made the problem simple by saying there are as many Purushas as there are human beings upon earth. So even if a few of them get released or liberated, it doesn't matter. The world will go on as it is. But now Gita says, no, the truth is that which is given by the Vedanta. Vedanta, which would say that there is only one Supreme Purusha. The first important new element we find is in the conception of Purusha itself. Prakriti conducts her activities for the pleasure of Purusha, but how is it that pleasure determined? Well, this is a crucial paragraph in which we'll have to understand the Gita stand regarding Purusha. So basically we know the relation between Purusha and Prakriti is that Prakriti does everything to please the Purusha, for the pleasure of the Purusha. But how is that pleasure determined? In the strict Sankhya analysis, it can only be by a passive consent of the silent witness. So even before Prakriti can start dancing to the tune of Purusha, the Purusha wants to say, yes, you can start your display, you can start your dance, you can start your entertainment, whatever. The thing is, first there has got to be the consent. And once there is a consent, then the Prakriti starts the creation and the multiplicity and the problems and the solutions, the pains and the pleasures and the joys and all that. Passively the witness consents to the action of the intelligent will and the ego sense. Passively he consents to the recoil of that will from the ego sense. He is witness, source of the consent, by reflection upholder of the work of nature, Sakshi Anumanta Bharta, but nothing more. But the Purusha of the Gita is also the Lord of nature. He is Ishvara. Now comes the analysis. So till here we have already said many a time that the Sakshi Anumanta, one who gives Anumanta is sanction. So that witness who gives sanction to Prakriti to really entertain, to please, to do the activities of pleasure for the sake of the Purusha. So he gives a sanction to the intelligent will and the ego sense. We have seen this intelligent will is the buddhi. So what happens is like this. We have the buddhi here, and we have the Prakriti, and we have Purusha. So Purusha gives sanction to Prakriti, and this sanction is really carried over by buddhi, which is the intelligent will. Now from this intelligent will, the sanction is carried over to ahankara, the ego, and from this ego it goes into the different levels of sattvic ego, the rajasic ego, and we have the tamasic. So we have seen that there are three types of egos again, the tamasic, rajasic and the sattvic. And from the sattvic ego, then we have all the manifestation in our individual lives. That means this Purusha, once it tells yes to Buddhi, then Buddhi says yes to Ahankara, and the Ahankara manifests itself in different ways. Whatever the variety of Ahankara it may be, the Sattvic or the Rajasic or the Tamasic. Now this is how the consent of the Purusha is carried over and carried on to the ego itself. So what happens is that whatever activities we do, they may be full of ego, still I feel confident that it is I who am doing, that there is the identification of the Purusha with my ego. So here whenever I do anything sattvic or rajasic or tamasic, I feel that I have the right to do. You see, I don't feel hesitant. Although it is my ego which is doing, I feel I am legitimate in doing this action, this desire, this wanting, this conquest, this writing, whatever we want to do. Because basically at the back of this, there is a sense of the consent by the Purusha. Because of that, we feel so very confident, what we call the self-confident. So how does this confidence come in? Because the self, the Purusha, itself has given the consent. So we say, I am self-confident. Because it's myself who has given me the consent. So this is how we go into this picture of the consent. So we get the question of that the passively he consents to the recoil of that will from the ego sense. Now in this reverse process, this is the consent given, but there could be a reverse process. That is, this rajasic ego or this ahankara or the ego sense, when it starts diminishing, or we say withdrawing, what Mother and Sri Aurobindo would also tell us, to lessen your ego, to control your ego, so that slowly the ego gets wiped off, erased and wiped off. That is nothing but what we see in Sankhya, the diminishing of the ego sense, or slowly we can withdraw or erase. Erase or withdraw the ego, and the more we do that, what is happening? This is being supported by the intelligent will. How can you start this egolessness? Only when your buddhi, the intelligent will, which is there supporting all our action and thought and feeling, it says, no, I think this is not right. I must withdraw from this ego. But how does the buddhi itself tell you suddenly? You see, you have lived 50 years enjoying your life and your position and your wealth and name and fame and everything. Suddenly, how is it that you get the sense of wanting to withdraw? Because, again at the back, the Purusha, he decides to withdraw. So the consent is given, but after a point the Purusha says, no, I withdraw my consent. But between the Purusha saying no and the real action, real effectivity of that sanction, it takes a lot of time. Because imagine all this, we have got to pull ourselves out of all this muck here. Because we have had deep roots of the tamas and the rajas and the sattva into matter, into life, into all these things. So even after the consent comes, then slowly the roots are pulled back, and then pulled back into the buddhi, and then pulled back into the prakriti, and then at a point of time you see, oh, I am Purusha, this is prakriti. So that is what we call the separation of the Purusha and the prakriti, and that can happen only by the practice of yoga philosophy, where we have seen yesterday the Ashtanga yoga. So you see, it's a very practical philosophy supported by the yoga system, which tells you how through yama and niyamas and pratyahara and dharana and asana and pranayama, you start withdrawing. So one side you start withdrawing, there's a personal conscious effort at withdrawal, and at a point there is also the Purusha which says yes. But here perhaps we should add that even the decision that you take that you want to withdraw, it will not come to you and come to everyone. There is somewhere the central decision. In Sri Aurobindo and the mother, they would always say there is a central decision to realize the psychic being. There is a central decision to surrender to the divine. Unless there is this central decision, that means the decision of the psychic being, or in the Sankhya language, the decision of the Purusha, even the practice of yogasanas you cannot do. That's why we see millions and millions and billions of people leading a life happy and all that, enmeshed in the ahankara. They don't even bother that there is something called Purusha. Should I withdraw the consent? Should I really withdraw from these activities? The notion also doesn't come to them, obviously because there is no central idea. And also secondly, many of us, thousands of us have read this about Sankhya, have read Mother and Sri Aurobindo and all the analysis of integral yoga and psychology. But how many really take up really the practice of yoga? So you see, reading is not sufficient. There's got to be the inner decision. And that, when it comes, why it comes is a different matter. What in the mother we see the word, the call from within, the call from below, the call from inside. That's called the call. You have suddenly the aspiration. So until you have this aspiration, you cannot really start the withdrawal process. But what we are doing is only a theoretical knowledge, but on the practical level, how many can do, who can do, it depends on your yogic possibility. And here too, as I was saying, not everyone can take to yoga, because it also depends on the stage of the evolution of your psychic being. That is of great importance. That is why only few turn to yoga and sadhana. Many read about it, but only few turn, and then fewer still can, and fewer still achieve. That's because of the depending on the stage of the evolution of your own psychic being in its own eternal journey. So that also depends. You see, there are so many factors. So it's not that somebody says, "Look, I've read Sri Aurobindo Life Divine Synthesis in 1945 and 1955, and it's been 40 years have passed by, it's only now I've come back to the ashram, and somebody the other day was saying, I'm 78 years old, 50 years back I was in the ashram. Of course he has seen the mother and all that. But somehow he had the urge to go for music and dance and drama and theatre and all that. And he really got lost in the theatre of life. And now he's 78, he comes back and says, oh my God, look, 50 years have passed by. I didn't do anything about sadhana, but now I want to come back. You see, this is what it is. You may have seen the mother, you may have read all the synthesis, the Savitri 10 times, but still the inner call must be there. So let's not confuse with the saying that all of us who are reading Savitri and Life Divine, they're all purified and transformed and, onto the path of yoga. I'll tell you a little practical joke, sometime in maybe 7-8 years back, I was on a lecture tour in US, and of course it was a big tour of Europe and all that. So in one of the lectures, I gave a long talk on the Bhagavad Gita, of course based on this essays on the Gita. So after that we had a dinner, commonly the host calls the guest for a dinner, and somewhat a big dinner was arranged with friends and relatives. So they came and asked my wife that, it was such a beautiful lecture from Dr. Reddy on the Gita, and he's so knowledgeable and all that. And then he said, but I'm sure he must be a vegetarian, so we have prepared vegetarian food for him. So my wife, for a moment, she was in great hesitation herself, because I'm not a vegetarian. Well, I can take non-veg, but it's not a pure vegetarian. But the question was, this is the thing that because he has given talk on the Gita and Savitri and the Life Divine, he must be a vegetarian. It cannot be otherwise, So this is our old idea that, sadhana means vegetarian, sadhana means this, sadhana. We have got a whole prescription what to do and what not to do. But I told the host, you see, I am what I am. On the stage I can give you the best of talks on the Gita, but at my dining table I also need the best of food of veg and non-veg. So it doesn't matter to me. So I didn't want to be really, cast into that mold that a vegetarian, a Gita speaker must be a vegetarian. Because a lot of our Indian gurus, those who speak on your Asta channel, they say, hey, you're taken to spiritual life, you must be a vegetarian, don't do that, don't do this. But I think in our Sri Aurobindo's yoga, we don't have anything like that. It's a thing of your consciousness, you want to take it, you want to leave it, you want to be above it, don't be attached to it. There's so many several ways. So that's what I'm saying, that these are things that we need to really put behind, is purely depending on your consciousness. Now coming back to this withdrawal, so there's got to be always the inner decision for doing yoga, otherwise you cannot take it up. So that is where we see the question of that they witness Purusha withdrawing his consent. But the Purusha of the Gita is also the Lord of nature. He is Ishvara. If the operation of the intelligent will belongs to nature, the origination and power of the will proceed from the conscious soul. He is the Lord of nature. You see, you can see there's a slight shift now in the relation between Purusha and Prakriti in the Gita. In the Sankhya, it was only Purusha was there giving a consent. By reflection, he upholds the works of nature. He has nothing to do with nature. But here in the Gita, he is the Ishvara. Ishvara is the Lord of nature. Where you say Ishvara and Ishvari, Ishvara and Shakti. If you remember in the Life Divine, we had these three beautiful categories: Brahman and Maya, Ishvara and Ishwari, Purusha and Prakriti. These are the three different levels of the manifestation of the divine and his Shakti. So at every level we have the Shakti aspect, Brahman with Maya, Ishvara, Ishwari. And he would say, beyond the Purusha and Prakriti is the Ishvara and Ishwari. Because this Ishvara, Ishwari is the link between the Brahman and Purusha. So that is why we call God Ishwar or Goddess Ishwari. Because it is this Ishvara who is the bridge, who takes the aspirations of mankind, gives it to the Brahman, and brings the blessings and the power and the consciousness of Brahman, transfers it to humankind. So therefore, Ishvara Ishwari is the closest to mankind's, people's hearts. We don't worship Purusha and Prakriti. We don't worship Brahman and Maya. So we worship only the Ishvara and the Ishwari because of this bridging aspect. So here that is why we say in the Gita, the Purusha is the Lord of nature, he is the Ishvara. And if the act of intelligence of the will is the act of Prakriti, the source and light of the intelligence are actively contributed by the Purusha. He is not only the witness, but the Lord and knower, master of knowledge and will, Jnata Ishvara. Now here we see the question, the difference comes in this, that here he was only a passive reflector of Prakriti. That's why, if you remember yesterday when we were reading, we had the word, the reflector soul, Sri Aurobindo calls that. Reflector soul is nothing but the same as the witness Purusha. So this is Sankhya, where they say it is only the witness Purusha or the reflector soul. But then the Gita goes a step forward. It says, we have said in the Sankhya that the Prakriti comes to Buddhi, Buddhi comes to Akar, etc. And it's Prakriti which gives the energy. Prakriti is also another name for energy, force, etc. But then the linking point is simply this: Prakriti, energy, force of Purusha. The whole solution, the synthesis comes only by the single possessive of. Force and energy cannot be independent of the Purusha. You see, we say energy, still perhaps in the scientific language we can say energy, there is the solar energy, there is there's a lot of electrical energy and all that. But then especially when we say the word force, force has got to be belonging to some person, some consciousness. Force cannot be devoid of consciousness. And that's what we have seen in our eternal formula when we say Sat, Chit, Tapas, Ananda. So it is Chit, Tapas always go together. That is force and consciousness. So you see, this can never be separated. So the moment you say that the Prakriti is a force, then Gita says it's got to be force of Purusha. Because this is, Purusha is the consciousness. Remember we said the word Purusha is consciousness. So Prakriti is the force of consciousness Exactly, we come to the Vedantic formula, Chit Tapas. So the Gita uses the same formula, that it is a force of Chit. So there the Gita tells us that he is not only the witness but the Lord and knower, master of knowledge and will. He is the Jnata Ishvara. So he is not only supplying energy, but why and how nature goes about doing her works, apparently unconscious, apparently non-intelligent, apparently we don't know where it is going, but always behind it there is the consciousness of the Supreme Purusha. We may not see apparently so easily. We may see a wonderful, great amount of intelligence, we said yesterday. But even behind that intelligence, there is always the Sat. There is always the Purusha. There is always the Brahman. So Aurobindo tells us here, he is the supreme cause of the action of Prakriti, the supreme cause of its withdrawal from action. In the Sankhya analysis, Purusha and Prakriti in their dualism are the cause of the cosmos. In this synthetic Sankhya, Purusha by his Prakriti, please note the word, his is italics. That's where the entire difference comes in. That's what I said, Prakriti of, belonging to. That's why we have the word. Sankhya Purusha by his Prakriti is the cause of the cosmos. You see, now we have understood the way, the answer here. In Sankhya it is Purusha and Prakriti, they are separate. But in the Gita, in the Vedanta, in Aurobindo, it is Prakriti, Purusha by his Prakriti, or Prakriti of Purusha. So these are small differences apparently, but this is the entire difference. The moment you say Prakriti belongs to, Prakriti cannot be independent of. Because when we say the word Chit Tapas, consciousness and force. But consciousness and force also cannot exist per se. Because consciousness of somebody. You see, just as force is of consciousness, consciousness is of somebody. And that is Sat. That's why I always glorify this formula Sat, Chit, Tapas and Ananda. Lot of our philosophical solution problems are solved by the single formula, if you can go deep into that. I mean, I've seen many times we get stuck in an explanation, but take up this formula. It is that a grand formula which can really unite, I could say, lot of philosophical problems. You know, scientists are looking for a theory that can unite everything. I would say this is the theory, Sat, Chit, Tapas, Ananda. Look into that. You'll have all the uniting formula there. Well, now coming to the next para. But what of the one self immutable, immobile, eternally free, with which the Gita began? That is free from all change or involution in change, avikarya, unborn, unmanifested, the Brahman, yet it is that by which all this is extended. Therefore, it would seem that the principle of the Ishvara is in its being. If it is immobile, it is yet the cause and lord of all action and mobility. But how? And what of the multiplicity of conscious beings in the cosmos? They do not seem to be the Lord, but rather very much not the Lord, Anisha, for they are subject to the action of the three gunas and the delusion of the ego sense. And if, as the Gita seems to say, they are all the one self, how did this involution, subjection and delusion come about, or how is it explicable except by the pure passivity of the Purusha? And whence this multiplicity, or how is it that one self in one body and mind attains to liberation while in others it remains under the delusion of bondage? These are difficulties which cannot be passed by without a solution. Well, one of the questions is already that what you said yesterday about the multiple Purushas, but there are now more questions. You see, philosophy is not so easy. You say, okay, Satchidananda, you take that, but there are logical points where you can come out and say, hey, it's all good to have a nice formula. But how do you explain that in this Supreme Purusha, we said, the Brahman is immobile, unchanging, which cannot be taken into parts. It is a single, undivisible, indivisible whole. But if that is so, then how can there be this multiplicity of conscious beings? If it is one, how are there this multiplicity that we see around? Sankhya said, well, that's why I said there's no one. There are many Purushas. But Vedanta says one. So question is, how can there be one and still we see the manyness? Then they do not seem to be the Lord. In fact, this manyness is quite opposite of the divine. Look at our nature and look at the divine nature. We are non-divine, we are undivine, we are Anisha, not the Isha, not the Lord. And then not only that, we are subject to, as the Lord is beyond the egos and the gunas, but we are completely subject to the three gunas. So he says these are some of the questions that come about, and we have to answer this before going further. Now this is a para where we get the answers. But Sri Aurobindo would not give you question and answer. He gives you a total different angle of looking at things, in which we have to now, one by one, find out the answers. The Gita answers them in the later chapters, which is actually in chapter 15, verses 16 and 17. The Gita answers them in its later chapters by an analysis of Purusha and Prakriti, which brings in new elements very proper to a Vedantic yoga, but alien to the traditional Sankhya. It speaks of three Purushas, or rather a triple status of the Purusha. Now see, again another complexity. Sankhya said multiple Purushas, Vedanta says one Purusha, and Gita says three Purushas. I can imagine the non-philosophy students getting a little bogged down, that the Indian philosophers had nothing better to do or what? Keep on dividing the Purushas according to their whims and fancies. Yeah, it is definitely a little puzzling. But I suppose this is not the Gita alone. This is basically Upanishadic. So what we are going to see now is from the Upanishads. What does it say? There is one unborn of three colors, says a text. The eternal feminine principle of Prakriti with its three gunas ever creating. There are two unborn, two Purushas of whom one cleaves to and enjoys her, the other abandons her because he has enjoyed all her enjoyments. In other words, they are described as two birds on one tree, eternally yoked companions, one of whom eats the fruits of the tree, the Purusha in nature enjoying her cosmos, the other eats not, but watches his fellow, the silent witness, withdrawn from the enjoyment. When the first sees the second and knows that all is his greatness, then he is delivered from sorrow. This is the important verse here. That is the question of the two birds. I think once we understand this, we'll understand the question of the three Purushas in the Gita. Now here, in the Gita, we have this famous verse of the two birds. See, we have a tree with two branches. And one bird is sitting here, and the other bird is sitting here. But this bird is taking a fruit, whereas this bird is just watching what this bird is doing. So this is called the lower bird, or maybe Shravamda calls here the first bird and the second bird. It's a very simple analogy, but it's very clear. So he says these are the birds, this one is watching this first one, and the first one is eating the fruit of the tree. And when the first bird looks up, he sees that the second bird is not even taking any fruit. And that is where he says that one of the birds is silent. No. In another word, they are described as two birds on one tree, eternally yoked companions, one of whom eats the fruits of the tree, the Purusha in nature enjoying her cosmos. So this is one Purusha. This is one Purusha enjoying nature. Thank you. The word is enjoying. Enjoying nature. And the second one, he says, the other one eats not but watches his fellow, the silent witness withdrawn from the enjoyment. So he is what we said, the witness bird. And he is withdrawn. When the first sees the second and knows that all is his greatness, then he is delivered from sorrow. So when this first Purusha looks at the witness and realizes that it is his, all is his. Or, in another word, it is because of him that he is enjoying the fruit. So then what happens? Then he is delivered from sorrow. Why? Now we get the explanation. That the point of view in the two verses is different, but they have a common implication. One of the birds is eternally silent, unbound self or Purusha, by whom all this is extended, and it regards the cosmos he has extended, but is aloof from it. The other is the Purusha involved in Prakriti. So now we are getting closer to the meaning. One Purusha is enjoying, and when you enjoy, what does it mean? You are involved. So there is an involved enjoyment, that is the lower Purusha, and the other one is, he regards the cosmos but aloof. The other one is detached. But important thing is looking at the world. but he is detached. The second one is involved. The first verse indicates that the two are the same, represent different states bound and liberated of the same conscious being. For the second, unborn has descended into the enjoyment of nature and withdrawn from her. The other verse brings out what we would not gather from the former, that in its highest status of unity, the self is forever free, inactive, unattached, though it descends in its lower being into the multiplicity of the creatures of Prakriti and withdraws from it by reversion in any individual creature to the higher status. This theory of the double status of the one conscious soul opens a door, but the process of the multiplicity of the one is still obscure. Well, this is an explanation to the question. You remember we had one of these questions in the previous paragraphs, that how is it that we are involved in this nature and we are supposed to be liberated in a higher level. So this question is answered by this, that there is one aspect of Purusha who was come down into the world and is part of this evolutionary world. But there is another Purusha who is beyond this involvement. So this is what in the next para we would have the words of Kshara Purusha and Akshara Purusha. One who is immobile and the other one who is mobile. These are the two different names. So we have Kshara is one who is mobile, means one who is active, dynamic, involved. And thereby he even forgets that his true nature is this. You see, as long as we are seeing one's own reflection in nature, in Prakriti, the Purusha forgets its true nature. But when we say the Purusha realizes itself, he says, oh, I'm not supposed to be involved. Involved it can be, but not lose itself. Whereas you see, this second one is looking at the world, but has not lost its true identity. This is the difference. And what does it mean in simpler words? This is the Atman within man. So this is the Purusha within each one of us. He is there involved in this world, enjoying this world. But there is also the other Atman which is beyond. So we have this word Akshara and Kshara. So this makes only two Purushas. But what has happened to the third one? Gita says there are three Purushas. So we will see who is the third one. So these are the two, but the third one is yet to come. But then Sri Aurobindo closes this para with a single question, that what has happened to the question of the one and the many? We have not yet answered that question. He says, we have, He said, this theory of the double status of the one conscious soul opens a door, but the process of the multiplicity of the one is still obscure. So in fact, we have had actually two questions from the previous para. One is that how do we explain this consciousness within Prakriti? Remember, this was the same question with Sankhya. Sankhya said Prakriti is unconscious. Then we said, how is it possible that man is consciousness? We see animal is conscious. We see the tree and the bird are conscious. So there is a consciousness, how does it come in? Sankhya had said, it is only a delusion. The thing is, it is only reflecting the consciousness of the Purusha. But the Gita says, no, it's not the reflecting. One Purusha, one aspect of the Purusha is indeed involved in matter, in man, in the tree, in the bird, in the animal, in the insect. So that is called the involved Purusha or the Kshara Purusha. Then there is the other aspect of this non-involvement, which is the Akshara. Now that was the first question. Now the second question we have still to answer. For that we take the next para. I'll just read a couple of lines, then we'll take a break. He says, to these two the Gita, developing the thought of other passages in the Upanishads, adds yet another, the Supreme Purushottama. This is the continuation of the same analysis, Kshara, Akshara, and the third one is called the Purushottama. Or the word is Uttama Purusha. Uttama plus Purusha, it becomes now Purushottama. So this is the third. Now in this analogy, where does the third Purusha come in? We have two branches, we have two Purushas. But there is no third bird here. So how does Gita bring in the sense of the Uttama Purusha? Is there a third one up here somewhere? As the first, second and the third here. So is Purusha, Purushottama, somebody who is on a different level, watching these two birds? Well, we'll see that after this short break. We can take a break now.